You know, I've always hated slow websites. You go on them, they load for 2 seconds, and after 4 or 5 seconds you actually see the content you want to see. And now you're thinking in your head, aren't you doing the same thing with this video? Well, if there was a way to cache the video, I would have already done that and optimized it, but there isn't. But there is a way to speed up your website, and let's talk about it. As you already saw the title of the video, today I'll be talking about client loaders, and as I already said, there is a way to speed up your websites, and client loaders are here to help. There's many uses for them, but before we go into the uses themselves, let's go into what they are, how you can use them, what they are first, and then we'll go from there. So if you haven't already watched my video on loaders, where I go over everything you need to know about loaders, I recommend you first check that video out and then come back here. I'll link it in the card on the top right, I hope, and I'm gonna give you a few seconds to go and come back. Alright, welcome back. So you didn't go to the second video, you already watched it, and now I'm making a fool of myself? Awesome, let's go over client loaders. Before I actually explain what they are, there are a few caveats I want to cover that you need to know first. So, React Router 6 calls them loaders. React Router 7 will hopefully call them client loaders, and I don't make a complete fool out of myself. So what's the difference between React Router 6 loaders and React Router 7 client loaders? Absolutely no difference. The reason they're called loaders in React Router 6 is because by the time they came out, the React Router team didn't know if they're gonna merge all of the Remix stuff back into React Router, so they called them loaders, but they are in essence client loaders from Remix. So by the time they get to React Router 7, they'll hopefully be called client loaders. Otherwise, I'll be very sad because I don't want to edit this video, but that's just something I wanted to clear up so you don't get confused as we talk about this, because what they do, what React Router 6 loaders do, it's identical to React Router 7 loaders, or client loaders rather, and that's all you need to know for now. So now that that's out of the way, I'm gonna do some edit magic and make this disappear, and we're back at the start. There are two ways that client loaders operate, and the way they operate is, it's either that the hydrate is true or hydrate is false. So what does this hydrate mean? In terms of code, this would basically be your export const client loader and then the implementation itself. So if you don't add hydrate true here, it's going to go on the right side. So by default, client loaders are set to hydrate false. If you add another line here, so if you do something like client loader dot hydrate is equal to true, it's going to go to the left side. So what does this mean for you? So when it's false, so the first time you land on a page, when you make a document request, and this document request, when the hydrate is set to false, the client loader is not gonna be called. So what's gonna happen is, this will go into the loader will execute and return some data, and then this goes back to the component. And then when you go to a different page, so I called it redirect, but this can also be a page submission, so redirect or submission. For easier understanding, I'm gonna do event here. So when you trigger an event to either redirect or submit some data and then process it with an action, you know that the loader is gonna re-trigger. But because this is set to false, the client loader is going to trigger on the second time that this route gets called. So what this means is, instead of going to the loader again here, what is gonna happen is, this will instead call the client loader, so client loader, which will then either call the loader, and then the loader is gonna return the data to the client loader, and then the client loader is gonna return the data to the component, or the client loader is not gonna call the server and return the data to the component right away. So what this means is, this might look a little bit complicated, but it essentially means is, after the first document request. And if you don't understand what the document request is and how it works, you can again go back and watch my video I talked about earlier about loaders. After the document request, the loader gets fired, so this one, and then sends data to the component. The client loader is not called at this point. And after you redirect or submit some data with the component, then the client loader gets called. And then it either calls the original server loader or it returns directly to the component. And we're gonna see an example of both of these scenarios, but this is what you need to understand. So that's when the hydrate is set to false, and that's what it means. So when the first document request happens, don't call the client loader, and on the subsequent requests to the route, call the client loader. So that's what it means. And then you have the second scenario when the hydrate is true. Again, we have the document request. Again, we have the loader. But this time, the request is gonna go directly through the client loader. And then the client loader is gonna respond to the component. What does this mean? So when the hydrate is true, the flow is the same, but in this flow, the client loader gets called right away. And as you can see, it kind of acts like a sort of middleware here, because when I change this color here, you can see that it gets called after the loader and before the component. So during the hydration. And what's middleware good for? Caching, among other things, but caching primarily. Because when this component, again, makes an event, what is gonna happen is the event is gonna trigger the client loader, and then if you cache something in the client loader, it can respond right away to the component without going to the loader, then back, then to the component. So it's more direct, it's faster, and we're gonna change the colors of this so it's a little bit more clear. So you can skip the call to the loader or to the server in this case and return the data directly to the component. So these are the two different scenarios that can happen with the client loaders. Now, you might be wondering what happens if, for example, in the loader, you have a few properties, and then in the client loader you want to add some config or extend it in some way or pull it, for example, from local storage or session storage or something related to the browser, but you don't want your component to render without that data. Well, there's something that we're gonna go over right now that can help you in these scenarios, and I'm gonna do some editing magic again and switch to a blank screen. So imagine this scenario. You're trying to return some data. So let's say this bubble is an object and it has the following properties: name, surname. So this is in the loader. So we're gonna say loader here. And the loader is returning these properties to the client loader. But in the client loader, we want to do the following. We want to return the name and the surname to the component, but we also store the info on age in the local storage for some reason. And for example, language. So because these two properties are not present, so I'm gonna add client loader here. As I was saying, these are not present in the loader, but we need them in the component. What we can do is we can call a special component called HydrationFallback. So what this HydrationFallback does is, until the client loader loads up the age and the language, it's going to render whatever JSX you have inside of here, and then when it's done, it's gonna let you go to the component. So if there wasn't the HydrationFallback, what would happen is, on the initial request, the data sent by the loader would end up in the component. It would be missing the age and the language, and you could potentially crash your component because you might expect the data to be here. So what you can do is use call the HydrationFallback, which waits for the actual client loader to respond to the component with all the information you need, and then you end up having everything you need in the component with the HydrationFallback here. And I changed the colors a little bit. So what does this mean for you? So basically you can imagine the HydrationFallback export as a suspense boundary that renders something different, so a suspended state, until the client loader is done and the component receives the actual final data, so you don't have issues until the client loader is done. So this would be your suspense boundary and this would be your JSX. So it's just a fancy way to get around it, and the best thing is that HydrationFallback works with, and that's another trick you can use with client loaders. The last thing is, if you watch the loader video, you know that I covered when do they refire. So client loaders are identical to loaders, so they refire under the same circumstances, and there's really not much to cover on this topic, so I'm gonna point you to the loader video if you want to know more about it, but for now let's go on further. So the last thing I want to cover is some real life examples and how you can use Remix.run client loaders to cache stuff and not call the server and stuff like that. So we're gonna switch to StackBlitz, and I've started up a vanilla config StackBlitz with Remix.run and Vid. So another thing I'm gonna add here is Remix client cache, and we're gonna be using this to cache stuff on the client. Now that it's installed, what we're gonna do is, I've already created the client loader and the loader export here. So the first thing I wanna show you is when do these get called and what I was talking about earlier. So this scenario is client loader is hydration set to false. So as you can see, I haven't set the hydration on this and there is a loader. So a little bit of an advanced tip that you need to know is, if the client loader is exported and you have no loader export, the client loader is automatically going to be set to hydrate true, because it assumes that it's supposed to run on hydration because you don't have any loaders. So hydrate true only needs to be set if you want to render it during the document request and you want it to run on the first go. If I open up the console here, we're just gonna ignore these random errors. So I'm gonna refresh the page, and as you can see here, the loader for the index route was triggered, but the client loader wasn't. And the reason behind this is, as I already said, the client loader, because the hydration is set to false, is not gonna run the first time you land on the page, but rather if I navigate to a different page and come back, or I submit to an action, then the client loader gets fired. And as you can see, I already added the log here and it doesn't get called. But if I do the following, clientLoader.hydrate is set to true, and then I save this, you can see the client loader has been called. And if I clear the console and refresh this, it's called on the first go of the application. So as you can see, as I already said, when you make the initial document request, if the hydration is set to true, the client loader is called. So let's do the first thing. Let's imitate a slow function. So const slow is equal to, and we have our slow function. Alright, so let's say in your loader you have some data and it's very slow. So await slow, and we're gonna make this async, and we're gonna make this a function. We're gonna save this, and we're gonna close the console here, and we're gonna return data is string. And we're just gonna remove this because we just want it to be slow, and we're gonna save this. So if I refresh this, so as you can see, the loader takes 2032 milliseconds. We waited for 2 seconds to see this. And if I kill this list and then do const data is equal to use loader data from React, and then I do data here, .data. This is what I was talking about earlier. So why did this crash? If we look at the loader, it looks right. So we have the data here, and even if I type this type of loader, it's not gonna complain, but it's gonna crash. And why did this happen? So because the client loader is involved in this processing as well, the data returned by the loader is gonna be correct, is gonna be data, but the client loader returns null, which means this is null and it crashes. So what needs to happen is, we need to return the data as string here as well, and this will work. But we don't want to return the data like this, but we want to await the server loader to finish. So what we're gonna do is, we're gonna say server loader, and I'm gonna type this with client loader function arguments, and we're gonna say this. So const server data is equal to await server loader, and we're gonna do async because it's async, and we're gonna save it. And then we're gonna return server data here instead. So as you can see, now it works. And if I refresh, it works again. So let's make it a little bit more fun. So what we're gonna do is, in the slow here, we're gonna resolve with a random number. So mat.random, and we're gonna multiply it by 100. And then we're gonna do const data is equal to await slow, and then we're gonna return that data. All right, so now we get random numbers. And if I refresh this, you can see that we wait for 2 seconds and then you get the new number. So again, if I refresh, it's shown after 2 seconds. All right, so why is this? Before I explain, I'm gonna type this to be promised number, just so this doesn't complain here. And we're gonna do something else just to demonstrate what is going on. So we're gonna create a new file called test.tsx. We're gonna export a default React component, so route return, and we're gonna do the following. So link to this, and we're gonna close it. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna say, oh, I'm missing the function declaration here, and then I'm gonna import link from Remix.run React, and I'm gonna save this. And then in my index, I'm also going to link to the test site, and we're gonna import the link here, and we're gonna save all of this. Oh, and I need some text, so go to test, and I'm gonna do a break here, and I'm gonna copy this over to the test one here. I'm gonna open a fragment up, and then inside of the fragment, I'm gonna paste this and save it. So if I click this, we're gonna go to the test, and here, and we need to change this as well. So check this out. When I click this, it took 2 seconds to go here and to show the new page. So what is going on is the loader here is slow. It's blocking our rendering, and we're waiting for 2 seconds. So in my previous loader video, I showed you how to cache it on the server and how you can speed it up. But now let's see how you can do that with the client loader as well. So I'm going to create a very simple cache here. So cache is equal to new map. And you can use some different kind of cache. I'm just gonna do this just to show you how this works. So const cached server data is equal to cache.get. We're gonna do key here. So this would be probably something dynamic on your case, in your case, but we just wanna demonstrate something. And if cached server data exists, return the cached server data. Otherwise, fetch it from the loader and then return the server data. All right. Oh, and one more thing is, once the server data is fetched, we're gonna do cache set key server data. So what did we just do here? We just created a in-memory cache in the browser, and whenever this loader triggers, an important thing to keep in mind is once you trigger the document request, the flow goes through the loader to the client loader to the component. But when you navigate to this page for a second time, the flow is different. The flow is, it goes into the client loader first, and then the client loader is responsible for calling the server loader. So what this means is, if we go into the client loader on the second try, if we hit this cache, it should automatically instantly return the data instead of waiting for 2 seconds for the slow server loader. So let's try it out right now. So I'm gonna refresh the page, and after 2 seconds we have this. So we're gonna go to the test page, and check this out. When I click here, it's instant, and the data is still the same. So if I go to the test, it's instant. If I go back, it's instant. So one more time, I'm gonna click in 1, 2, 3. So it's instantly navigatable, and why this is because we enter the cache server data here. Alright, so what if... Alright, so now we know how to cache something. Another cool thing that you can do here is, for example, I use the map, but as you probably already know, the loader itself can't use browser APIs like localStorage and stuff like that. But that's not true for the client loader. So what we can do is we can use browser APIs here for caching. So for example, I'm gonna do cache is localStorage. So because cache is now local storage, we can do cache get item instead, and then set item. A small caveat here is that you need to JSON stringify the server data, and then you need to get the item, and if it's there you need to JSON parse it. Alright, and if I save this and I refresh the page, and this is not working because I didn't do it in the correct order, but if I change the key and save it, now it should work. Alright, so again, if I refresh this, it takes 2 seconds. If I go to here and come back, it's instant. And we just used local storage from the browser. Alright, so another cool caching library I want to show you is Remix Client Cache. This is something I created so I can speed up my routes for free, and I'm gonna import cache clientLoader and use cached loader data. Alright, so instead of having all of this logic here, I'm just gonna do this. Alright, so that's the first part, and here we're gonna do cached. Alright, so what did we just do? We just added stale while revalidate cache with 2 lines of code. And how does this work? If I go to test and come back, it's instant, but it swaps the data once refetched. So what does this mean? When you go to test and when you come back, it's going to call the server loader for you. It's going to fetch the latest data from the server, and then if it's different than the current data in memory, it's gonna swap it with the newest data. So if I go back here, it has 49, and then after 2 seconds, once the server loader responds, it changes it to 79. And if I go here again and come back, it's gonna be 79, and after 2 seconds it's 10.8. And that's the cool thing about client cache, is that you can create a stale while revalidate cache really easily, and because React itself is reactive to changes, once the data from the use cache loader data changes, it just hot swaps the data for you, and then React re-renders the component and shows the newest data. And this is really useful if you're really not sure if the data changed. It can change, but not as often. You can use this little trick to hot swap it, and for example, if you're rendering an article, the user maybe starts reading it, and it will just swap the sentences that are out of sync. Alright, I've shown you that. Now, have you ever heard about TanStack Query? You have? Well, let me show you how you can use TanStack Query with this. So, if you don't know, TanStack Query, or React Query as it's also known, is one of the most popular asynchronous state management libraries for React. It can be used in other frameworks, but I really don't know how popular it is with other frameworks because it started from React. And to be honest, I don't use TanStack Query, or rather, I don't use React Query. But what's really cool about TanStack Query is, if I go to the docs, you can see that for each doc, there's a small label called React on the right, and then you have the core here. And if I open it up, you can see that it has a bunch of ways you can use it. And what this core is, it basically allows you to use their caching approach with queries and everything you know and love about React Query, but not with the hooks, but rather with an object that has a bunch of properties you can call. So the cool thing about this is, if I switch back to StackBlitz, as I already said, you can use Remix Client Cache to cache the data. But there's another way you can use Remix Client Cache, and that's by implementing your custom cache adapters. So if I do Remix Client Cache here, so this is in the entry.client, and I use the create cache adapter, and we're gonna need the cache adapter as well. And then we npm install TanStack /React Query. Alright, and then I import TanStack React Query, so I import query client, and then I create an instance of it. So for example, a query client like this, and then I set the stale time here, and you can add a bunch of other properties as well. And I'm gonna paste in a snippet I already pre-wrote, and we're gonna go through what this does. So it's called the React Query Adapter, and it implements the cache adapter from Remix Client Cache. And basically what this allows you to do is, it allows you to use the query client from TanStack React Query as the adapter for the Remix Client Cache. And if I do configure global cache from Remix Client Cache, and then I call a new instance of React Query Adapter, and then I save this, and then if I click here, you can see it works the same way as it did before. It waits for 2 seconds, it refreshes the data. But now that we configured the cache globally, and there are other ways you can do cache configurations with Remix client cache, but this is one of the ways you can do it. This uses TanStack Query client to store and cache the information. But hey, don't take my word for it. Let's actually install something as a dev dependency. So we're gonna install TanStack React Query DevTools. We're gonna wrap this with the query client provider, and the client is gonna be query client. And then we pop in the React Query DevTools here, and we're gonna import them from React Query DevTools, and I'm gonna save this. But actually, now that I think about it, we need to use the query client not here but in the root, because this would cause hydration issues, and also this. So we're gonna remove these and we're gonna just move it into the root. So instead of this, we're gonna do this. So query client provider children, query client provider closed. The client is going to be the query client, and we're gonna import it. And then we're gonna do React Query DevTools, and we're gonna import them as well, and then save this. Alright, so I had to move the query client inside of the root here, and then import it in the entry.client here. So the difference is that the query adapter is here, it's configured like this, and in the root you have the layout. It has the DevTools and the query client provider, and if I save this, you can see the small DevTools icon here. And if I click on it and then I go to test and then I come back, alright, and as you can see we have an entry and it's actually cached in the query client provider. Oh, and I moved it inside of the app here instead of the layout, because the layout is not supposed to be used for the error boundary, so I just moved it over. And as you can see, we're using TanStack React Query cache provider to store everything here, and you can even use their DevTools and see what you stored, how long it's gonna be there, when it's last updated, what the query was, the query key here, the state, so you can even see the data here. So it was 79.4. So if I go to test here and then I come back, it changes the data here, the data update count changes when it was updated, and that's it. So you can even use their DevTools and TanStack Query for caching by just setting it inside of Remix client cache as a cache provider. And that's everything I have to show you on caching with clientLoaders. And this also wraps up today's video on clientLoaders. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you like the video, feel free to like it, comment, subscribe, whatever you feel like doing. If you hated it, let me know in the comments as well. I'd also like to know if you'd like to see more of these and what next should I cover. I already covered loaders and client loaders. Should I cover actions or client actions or anything else? Are there any cool tricks you'd like to see me pull off with these? And that's pretty much it. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Bye!